All right, live on YouTube. Good to go there. Up and running. That's a positive sign given where we've been the last couple of weeks. It looks like we are also live and good to go on Facebook here. It is Tuesday night, talking a little Georgia football with you. My name is Connor Riley with Dog Nation. News never really slows down here in January. Georgia's still looking for a defensive backs coach. There we go. Looks like we're up and running on Facebook. Busy still. A lot of news out there. Obviously, Georgia's still looking for a defensive backs coach. SEC schedule is set to be announced tomorrow. I imagine we're going to talk a lot about that and what comes with that. Coaching Carousel sort of winding to a close here. I believe Tennessee is the only major program that has some hires left to make. And I would point out that Oregon and LSU have both hired defensive coordinators. We're going to get into sort of what that means specifically with regards to Glenn Schumann a little bit here later on in the show. Ton of news and notes, questions you guys might have. Georgia is back doing off-season workouts to sort of tease that already. They just put out a video a few minutes ago. You have the image from Jermaine Burton there yesterday. Still waiting on spring practice updates, what that might be, when that might actually be with regards to G-Day. We have an idea, but not a firm date with that. Obviously, National Signing Day, a week from tomorrow. Terry and Arnold, obviously the number one name and target to know there. And a couple of 2022 targets announced when they're going to be committing Emmanuel Henderson, number one running back in the country. Big-time defensive end / tackle Michael Williams, and defensive tackle Christian Miller also from the state of Georgia putting out their sort of commitment timelines. So we have everyone about another 10, 15 seconds here to come on in. Facebook, Michael Green, welcome in. Mike Anderson, Eddie Burleson, good to see you guys. Good to have you in. Tony Henry. So Troy Glover, good to have you guys in here. So, I guess we can start with sort of the defensive backs coaching update. Not a whole lot of movement on this front, which isn't all that surprising, I think, given some of Kirby Smart's past defensive hires. I mean, you can look very specifically at Charlton Warren and the sort of process that led to him getting hired. Kirby Smart waited over 6 weeks to make that hire in the winter of 2018-2019 before ultimately bringing in and settling on Warren, who I think all things considered was a pretty good coach, is now the official defensive coordinator, at Indiana. That hire was officially announced today. So what Georgia is looking for, obviously recruiting matters, but how much it matters, I don't know. I think you can even look at the Terry and Arnold recruitment here a little bit. Kirby Smart's very involved in that. Kirby Smart's a world-class defensive backs coach. He knows what he is doing on that side of the ball. Kirby Smart, perhaps more than a lot of other college coaches, maybe more than any, plays a significant role in the sort of daily recruitment of these prospects. So as far as a defensive back and needing a big-time recruiter there, I don't necessarily know if that is as big a need as, say, you look at the quarterbacks coach, you look at wide receivers, offensive lines, tight ends, a position where Kirby Smart is not quite as familiar with, just given his rise. And he, again, is one of the best defensive back coaches in the country. We do know a little bit. Glenn Ford, a former Georgia defensive back himself, teammates of Kirby Smart, runs the I Dare You Academy out of Atlanta. A personal trainer, a guy who has some NFL coaching experience. I believe he had a fellowship with the Cleveland Browns in 2019, but no college experience. But he's worked with a lot of defensive backs. Minka Fitzpatrick of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Marlon Humphrey of the Baltimore Ravens. Both those guys played at Alabama. You have David Daniel and William Poole, current members of the Georgia team, as guys that have trained with Glenn Ford. He knows players. He knows how to evaluate and help young players get better and really sort of teach the position, which is, I think, something that Georgia's really looking for. They're not looking for the bona fide just a recruiter guy who just goes out there, recruits, and then doesn't really know how to teach or help players get better at this position. I think they're looking for sort of a technician, someone who can teach the finer points and eventually bring them along in terms of recruiting. And, I mean, you look at the way Georgia has done in recent seasons. DeAndre Baker was a first-round pick, Thorpe Award winner. Jarrett Reed was a Thorpe Award finalist, and he caught on with the Rams this past season, even though he didn't get drafted. Eric Stokes is going to be, I think, a second-round pick. Tyson Campbell might potentially be a first-round pick after what Mel Kiper Jr. had to say today. So recruiting-wise, Georgia's going to get talent with defensive backs because, in part, Kirby Smart is there. But they need someone who can sort of come in and develop them. And, again, this is a really big hire. And we sort of talked about this today. because on Dog Nation Daily with Brandon, because while yes, you do sort of want to have him in place by the time Terrion Arnold ultimately decides. Arnold's a 4-star safety out of Tallahassee, Georgia's last big recruiting target. You're not just making this hire just to land Terrion Arnold. You're doing this to help set up this 2021 secondary, because I think you look at it right now, if you want to say that the secondary is the weakest position or position group in Georgia's 2021 team, I think you're pretty justified in saying that. They have no one with starting experience at cornerback. Lewis Cine and Chris Smith, they are not sort of the playmaker that Richard LeCount was a season ago, or even JRE 2 seasons ago. And then Starr, you thought you had someone in Tyreek Stevenson who could really man that position, but he's now at Miami, so you're looking at maybe Latavius Brainy. We've talked here a lot about Keely Ringo, but he's yet to play a collegiate snap. I know Nyland Green is someone who we like the physical upside of what he might bring, but again, it's all upside at this point. None of it is really proven production. So whoever Georgia ends up hiring, and I expect either this week or next week that to officially come to a close and that person be hired. But they're going to have to be someone that can really teach this position and help these guys grow and get better, which sounds obvious, but it's sort of the fact. We can run through some of the other names here. I don't expect Corey Raymond to get this job. I know he's sort of the biggest name out there that fans want. He interviewed for the job back in 2019, but LSU hires their defensive coordinator, Durante Jones. It sounds like Raymond is going to stay on as a cornerbacks coach there. So I'd be surprised, I think, if he ends up being the guy that gets hired in Athens. Will Muschamp is another name. He gets his buyout, $12.9 million from South Carolina. I don't expect him to be a defensive backs coach. I could have certainly seen defensive coordinator if Dan Lanning had gone on and taken that Texas job. But that's a very demanding role for someone like Muschamp to step into. And, quite frankly, I think he's, ready to sort of take things, ease up a little bit, take a year, figure things out where things are. He has an analyst role waiting for him at Georgia. I think he'd be wise to accept it, sort of take a back seat and figure out his next career move from there. And you've seen this work at places like Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, where guys to Alabama, you take an analyst role. You look at Steve Sarkisian, took an analyst role, took some time away from the spotlight, then went to become the Atlanta Falcons offensive coordinator, made his way back to Alabama, and now he's the head coach at Texas. And when he took that Alabama analyst job, I don't think anybody thought that was where he was going to end up. So I think there's some real value in that there for both Muschamp and I think for the Georgia program as well. But ultimately, I do not expect him to be the defensive backs coach hire that Georgia ends up making. I will say one name that at least interests me and how real he is, we don't know yet. Marcus Woodson out of Florida State. He's a guy who worked at Auburn the 2 prior years and this past year at Florida State. Worked with Dan Lanning in Memphis, has developed a couple of really good defensive backs in his time at Auburn, has SEC experience, knows what it takes to recruit in this league, and is someone who I'd be really interested to see if Georgia can convince him to leave Florida State, come take this Georgia job, and sort of see what he can do here, because Florida State, it is a project there right now with Mike Norvell. I think that program realizes they have a long way to go to sort of turning things around as well. Yes, Travis McCullough mentions Jamil Ade from West Virginia as a name to know as well. He is on Neil Brown's staff there in Morgantown. That was a name that was floated out there today as someone who had interviewed for the job. So I'll be interested to see who they ultimately end up hiring. I don't know how much we're going to know about him right away in terms of what he'll be able to do. I think at this point, it's not going to be some big slam dunk name, some super well-known guy. Even I think Woodson at this point is a little bit of a stretch, but I think Georgia is going to be diligent with this. That was the word I used in my headline last week, and sort of figure this out and have this in a place where they have a guy like Charlton Warren who can develop a really good reputation, build off of that, and then go from there and ultimately move on to another job like Warren did, becoming defensive coordinator at Indiana. So, and ultimately to sort of tie this first segment up tonight, whoever Georgia ends up hiring as a defensive backs coach is going to have a really tough job on their hands just to start their time at Georgia, because you have to have guys like Keely Ringo, Nyland Green, 2 brand new cornerbacks ready to go. You continue to build on what Lewis Cine and Christopher Smith do at safety. But the reality is Georgia opens the season against Clemson next year. And yes, DJ Uiagalelei isn't Trevor Lawrence, but he's not a slouch either. And Justin Ross is coming back, and we'll see if he's able to get on the field. But EJ Williams, Frank Lasden, Joe Nada, those guys are all top 100 receivers. Clemson has done an excellent job of developing at that position. And Georgia's secondary is going to have its hands full from the start next season. So whoever Georgia's defensive backs coach is next season, has got his work really cut out for him, and he's going to have to make a lot of progress and develop guys quickly into being able to get on the field and be contributors for Georgia in this 2021 season, because I think you look at this, there's really maybe no bigger or more important position coach next season than what this defensive backs coach has to do in terms of developing the talent. Alex on YouTube brings up Derek Ansley as a possible hire. I don't think so. He's a guy who has ties to the NFL, and I could see him going back to that route. He was with the Oakland Raiders before taking that Tennessee job, and with the way things ended there, I just don't think he was all that thrilled about it. Obviously, that could be a potential move, but if memory serves me correct, Ansley was more tied to Pruitt than necessarily Kirby Smart in their time there in Alabama and Tuscaloosa. So I'd be surprised if Ansley is someone that ends up getting that job. So we'll see there. 10-minute mark in here. Connor Riley here with Connor in Coverage. It's our weekly Tuesday night show, sort of talking all things Georgia here. Coaching news, schedule announcement. The SEC said today that they're going to update or announce the 2021 schedule tomorrow. As of right now, no, the 8 teams, assuming the SEC goes back to an 8-team schedule that Georgia will play. We also know 4 current dates that are non-conference games. They play Clemson and Charlotte on September 4th. They play UAB at home on September 11th. They play Charleston Southern on November 20th, and then they're going to play Georgia Tech on November 27th, and that game in all likelihood is going to be in Atlanta, just given it is a 2021 odd year, and odd years that game is played in Atlanta, even though obviously Georgia didn't get to play that game this season. So you have the schedule announcement. We'll touch on that a little bit more. Yeah, Wade Josie brings up, that defensive back room. I do think you end up going the transfer portal route to bring in someone with at least starting experience at a fairly high level, because again, Georgia doesn't have anyone in that position right now who has been able to say, hey, I've started, much less even I think play significant snaps at that cornerback position. So I think that's a good point there made by Wade Josie, is something to watch. So segment 2 tonight, coaching carousel. While yes, Georgia does still have to hire a defensive backs coach, most of the high major hires this offseason are done. Oregon filled its defensive coordinator job with Tim DeRuyter. LSU filled its defensive coordinator opening with Darian Jones. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name there. One thing that both those jobs had in common, and there were a lot of defensive coordinator openings this offseason. You look at Texas, comes to mind there. So a lot of big-time defensive coordinator openings. And it wouldn't have come as a surprise at the beginning of the month if one of Georgia's top 2 assistants on the defensive side of the ball, Dan Lanning or Glenn Schumann, ended up taking either of those jobs. And obviously Lanning flirted with the Texas job. It had been rumored that he had been a favorite, a top candidate there. And then ultimately he comes out and says that he's staying, he's back. And then those later 2 jobs, LSU and Oregon, had mentioned Schumann as a possible candidate. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about Schumann here. For those that don't know, Schumann was one of the first assistants Kirby Smart had hired. He'd actually brought him over with Alabama and turned him into the inside linebackers coach. It was his first on-field coaching job at an SEC level. He's had that job for 5 full seasons now, and you look at some of the guys that he's helped develop. Roquan Smith comes to mind. Monty Rice is another good player. Nakobe Dean. All those latter 2 guys were guys that he had recruited to the position. Quay Walker is someone he's developed. This last cycle, you look at guys like Xavier Sori and Shmuel Munden. He's developed a very, very good reputation as being an excellent recruiter and an excellent developer of talents. I know Monty Rice told us one time that he thinks Schumann is, bar none, the smartest coach that Georgia has on its staff. So I think that shows the kind of respect that Schumann has among players, and is why he is so popular and so beloved, and ultimately why he was a candidate for jobs like Oregon and LSU. Right now, we don't know if he interviewed for those jobs, but it wouldn't come as a surprise if Schumann is a name that continues to get mentioned in years to come. And ultimately, Georgia holding on to Schumann and obviously Lanning as well, I think it says a big thing, is a big reason why Georgia comes away as right now as a winner from the coaching carousel. Because you look last year at Alabama, yes, and I know statistically over the years they lose more assistants than they keep. But last year, Alabama kept every single one of their offensive assistants and every one of their defensive assistants as well. And then they go out and they go 10-0 against an SEC schedule and then beat Notre Dame and Ohio State in the college football playoff to cap a 13-0 season. Coaching continuity matters. And I think with Georgia, with all the sort of changes and weirdness that happened last offseason with this program, you sort of saw an effect of that. You look at the offensive side of the ball, you bring in Todd Monken, you bring in a new offensive line coach in Matt Luke. it's not a surprise that Georgia took a while to come together offensively. Now, spinning this ahead to 2021 and what it means to have those guys back, you look at specifically the position that Schumann coaches, inside linebackers. Yes, Monty Rice is gone, but Nakobe Dean is coming back. Quay Walker has playing experience. Channing Tindall really came on and developed over the course of this 2020 season. Now you mentioned some of those other young players, Ryan Davis, Tresman Marshall, Munden, and Sori, to go along with Jamon Dumas-Johnson out of Maryland. There's a lot of talent in that inside linebackers room. Ultimately, I think with Schumann, he is going to be a defensive coordinator, and farther than that, I think he's one day going to be a head coach somewhere. But Georgia keeping him specifically for this cycle when he easily could have taken a higher job, as right now he's only a co-defensive coordinator for Georgia, I think is a big win. If you can hold on to those high-quality position coaches who pretty clearly are capable of being a defensive coordinator, and Kirby Smart has pointed out that Schumann has held higher responsibilities since getting bumped up to co-defensive coordinator prior to the 2019 season. Schumann's a really well-regarded coach, and the fact that Georgia was able to keep him from the likes of Oregon, LSU, and other programs is a big win for Georgia in 2021, and just another reason why 2021 sets up to be a really special year for these Georgia Bulldogs. So, I do see a question here, Alex. Why do you think Lanning or Shue would take a lateral position? Well, with what Georgia does defensively, I don't know how much it is a lateral. We can go specifically with Lanning in Texas. Yes, I guess in terms of title, going from Georgia defensive coordinator to Texas defensive coordinator is a lateral move. But in terms of responsibility, in terms of what he was going to be able to do on the defensive side of the ball, in terms of being able to shape the defensive side of the ball in Texas, he was going to have a lot more responsibility and freedom there working for an offensive-minded coach and Steve Sarkisian, whereas at Georgia, reality is it is always going to be Kirby Smart's defense. He's always going to get credit for that. Lanning is a Broyles Award finalist, one of the best assistant coaches in the country. I think like Schumann, he is someone who is going to one day be a head coach. But I think you keep him around as well. You keep him from taking that Texas job. It's more continuity, especially at an outside linebacker position that's really interesting to me because you have guys in Nolan Smith and Adam Anderson who have played, but they've never been asked to be the true leaders of that position group. You had Jermaine Johnson, Azeez Ojulari in the past as well. So I think with what Lanning is able to do and develop there, and then a young guy we can mention, MJ Sherman as well, who is a really impressive player, and I think someone who, as he continues to get more reps and get healthy, I think he can have a very promising career for Georgia. Keeping him intact and keeping him in charge of both the defensive coordinator role and in the outside linebackers room, I think is another strong sign for Georgia in 2021, because I think the Texas defensive coordinator job, from what you're allowed to do and certainly from what you're able to get paid there, is maybe a little bit better of a job right now than the defensive coordinator job. It's a small difference, but I think there is one there. As far as Schumann, if he's going from linebackers coach and co-DC to the defensive coordinator at a place like LSU or a place like Oregon, that's a clear step up in responsibility there. So the fact that Georgia was able to keep him around, I imagine Lanning and Schumann are both going to end up getting raises. When those get announced, I don't know. And I know obviously money is a little bit tighter in the pandemic, though. From all accounts, Georgia is in a good spot there. I think with Schumann, keeping him as a co-DC and a linebackers coach, a job I believe he is well overqualified for at this point in his time, I think it's a big win for Georgia. And you can even look at other positions as well. You look at running backs coach Del McGee. I think he's clearly ready he's earned his chance to be a play caller. He is a great developer of talent. He's an exceptional recruiter. You could name the last bad Georgia running back. You really can. And that goes a lot to McGee. And you even look at some of the guys that weren't obvious superstars coming out. And Elijah Holyfield, he was a 1,000-yard rusher. Brian Herring was a diamond in the rough, and he had some really big moments in his time at Georgia. So McGee is someone similarly who I think has really developed a great reputation. It's a little befuddling, other than just the fact that he's a running backs coach, and offensive coordinators more often than not tend to be quarterbacks coaches, that McGee is still, from the position that he was hired at in year one at Georgia, is still a running backs coach. I think eventually someone is going to wise up and pay Del McGee a lot of money to coach elsewhere, because he's certainly earned that opportunity. Let's see. This is a really good question. So we were just talking about Del McGee there. Is Zeus staying going to hurt Milton? I don't think so. I certainly see where Gary is coming from there, in the sense that Zeus coming back obviously impacts touches for Milton. But I would point out that Kendall has gotten hurt these last 2 seasons. And so, obviously, durability, and with Samir, yes, about the 2 ACL injuries, but he's been healthy and been able to play in every game the last 2 seasons for Georgia. So I think worst case scenario, Zeus does funnel some carries away from him, but also keeps Kendall fresh. I think Kendall is the more explosive runner of the two. And, you have him fresher, able to hit those big plays. I think that really helps you over the course of a season. So having both, and I've said before, I think Georgia is absolutely a better team with Zamir White on it than him off in the NFL. And while, yes, that does mean less carries for Kendall Milton, I think Georgia can find a way for both White and Milton to be effective. I think you look at the Alabama game this year, they both had big runs in that game, at least in the first half anyway. And I think there is certainly a world in which he and James Cook and Kenny McIntosh can all coexist and form a successful backfield for Georgia. So let's see. And yeah, again, Milton's really popular. I'll be interested to see sort of what the next steps in his evolution are and how he improves this offseason. Again, staying healthy is something I think he can improve on. Obviously he had a knee injury against Florida that took him out for the later half of the year. He had a nice catch in that Peach Bowl against Cincinnati. I think the big difference right now is that Zamir is able to contribute beyond just running the ball. Whereas with Kendall, I think we're still, and again, Kendall's a freshman. We're still waiting to see that. Can Kendall improve as a pass blocker? I believe he can. He's a tremendously physically gifted athlete. Can he improve as a pass catcher? Can he help out on special teams? Because Zamir is an absolute ace on special teams and is a big reason why Kirby Smart trusts him on the field there. So let's see. Chad Buchanan says Milton's the best running back. That could very well be the case, but having guys like Zamir, you even look at DeAndre Swift and his time in college. I think his sophomore and junior years, it was clear he was the best running back on Georgia's team. But he also, I don't want to say needed help, but he benefited from having guys like Elijah Holyfield or Zamir White or Brian Herrien to help carry the load to where he wasn't having to rack up 250, 200 carries. And ultimately, I do think getting to the NFL fresh has sort of helped. You look at a guy like Alvin Kamara from Tennessee who didn't have a ton of wear and tear on his tires, and I think that certainly helped him. But obviously a counter to that would be guys like Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, who racked up big carry totals at Alabama and Florida State. So I do think that it's a tricky balance to find, but it's a luxury to decide, well, okay, do I give the ball to a guy who had 11 touchdowns last year in Zamir White, or do I give the ball to a guy who showed some pretty nice explosive plays in Kendall Milton? So ultimately, I think they'll be able to figure it out. Let's see. William Gleaton, any word on Gilbert? No, there has been no movement. I will say classes have started at Georgia and drop ad has actually come to an end. So it looks like if Gilbert wanted to be here for the spring, it probably can't happen at this point. Now, obviously, he can transfer later on, and he is, as of right now, still in the transfer portal. I know Florida is a contender for him. I know LSU is trying hard to get him back. And ultimately, my thoughts on Gilbert is if he still wants to come here in May or June or July, whenever that is, he is worth patiently waiting on. And I think one other reason why maybe we haven't seen him go ahead and make that move is that the NCAA was expected to vote this month on allowing a one-time transfer rule. That has actually been changed, or not changed, but it has been moved down further the line to where the NCAA will vote on that and ultimately, I believe, accept that policy. But right now, it's still an unknown of when that'll be and if that'll be instituted in time for players to have that immediate eligibility in the 2021 season. So I do think that is a reason why Gilbert is taking his time and maybe not necessarily rushing into whatever new school, because if he has to go sit out a year, what's sort of the point there? Let's see. Going to our third little topic here, SEC schedule announcement. The SEC is going to announce the 2021 football schedule tomorrow at 2 p.m. on the SEC Network. Dog Nation will have wall-to-wall coverage of everything, reacting live to it, I'm imagining. It'll be a big day, an interesting day. We know the 8 SEC opponents, assuming Georgia goes to an 8-game schedule, or the league, I should say, goes to an 8-game schedule, and I believe that is what is going to happen. Georgia's home games next year are Missouri, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Arkansas. Arkansas is the SEC West opponent. Georgia beat them 37-10 this season. The road games are Tennessee, Auburn, and Vanderbilt. And one interesting note about that, all 3 of those programs will have first-year head coaches. Brian Harsin in the first year at Auburn, Clark Lay in the first year at Vanderbilt. And right now it's Kevin Steele at Tennessee. I expect them to maybe try and hire a head coach this week. Whoever that might be, we'll see. I know Tony Elliott has been a popular name. Personally, a name I would keep an eye on. Again, reckless speculation here, but I think a guy like James Franklin would be a really interesting and intriguing name to go after. But either way, all three of those guys are going to be their first year at the programs. And then obviously the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville as well. And BA and I even talked about today, what does the SEC take away from this 2020 season, where I think flexibility and the ability to adapt and move things around and not be so rigid in the way things have been done, what is taken away from that? Do they move some of the more traditional rivalry games around? Obviously Georgia-Florida comes to mind, that game being played around Halloween. I believe October 30th is that Saturday this year. What does that do? Where does that game fall? I would still expect it to fall there, but what changes are made to the schedule? Obviously, I think you're going to see Auburn probably early in the season as opposed to seeing it at the end, when they would traditionally have to play Georgia and Alabama back-to-back. But I think it's an exciting time. I, again, expect them to go to 8 games, so I don't think we're quite there where they're going to go to a 9-game conference schedule. Arkansas is the team they're supposed to play, but it wouldn't surprise me either if the league decides to rip everything up and say, hey, you know what? We're just going to go out and create the most exciting matchups we can, sort of like they did this past season. So I'll be interested in and excited to sort of see what it means. I do personally right now think that 2021, September 4th rolls around, is when Georgia plays Clemson. Hopefully we're able to have enough people vaccinated. COVID is in a place where we're able to have fans in the stands again. And I guess Bank of America Stadium, Bank of America Field, whatever it's called there, is in Charlotte. I hope that place is rocking, filled with Georgia and Clemson fans. I think there'll be more Georgia than Clemson fans there. But I'm looking forward to that date, and hopefully that is a date where fans will be able to attend once again as far as being in there. Spring practice, I did promise you guys an update on that. So they have not sent any dates on that yet, but I found it today. Coastal Carolina, the Chanticleers, had a great season this past year. They announced they're actually going to start spring practice tomorrow. I do think teams are going to be able to have spring practice this year, just given the reason we didn't have it last year was because we had no idea how to sort of combat COVID, get testing, keep everyone safe. That's not the case anymore. We have rapid testing. We're able to test guys to where you don't have a massive breakout of football practice. So I think they're waiting to sort of see what the dates are, what dates best line up. I will say April 15th is a key date to know right now, because that is when the NCAA's dead period is supposed to go through and ultimately end. I'd be surprised if that's when it ends. I think that might get pushed back a little bit, just given sort of where we are right now. And I don't see things getting better enough to the point where the NCAA is going to allow high school prospects to travel all over the country and go visit these schools and go meet coaches face to face. But, knowing some things we traditionally know, there's no spring break at Georgia this year, but they do sort of have an instructional break on March 12th, no classes there. So you would think that next Monday, the 15th, would be maybe when spring practice potentially starts. The Masters is the 8th through the 11th, so you can probably rule that weekend out. So I think you consider the NCAA dead period date of April 15th. I think April 17th, that Saturday, as a potential day for G-Day makes a little sense there. I think also potentially the 24th as well could be, depending on when Georgia ultimately decides it wants to start, and the potential of hosting visitors still looms. So we've gone about 30 minutes, 29 technically here, but we can take some of your questions. Alex asks, if UGA beats Clemson in the opener, do you think they win out? I mean, obviously, to quasi-answer your question, I think whoever wins that game will be the number 1 team in America starting week 2. That's a huge game. It'll be a matchup between top 5 teams, Georgia and Clemson. Clemson's probably going to be number 2 or 3. I think Georgia's going to be number 4 or maybe potentially number 3, depending on how things shake out there. So it's a huge game. If they are able to win that game, I think it goes a long way for them for playoff consideration. I guess, Alex, for your win out, does that mean the regular season, or does that include the SEC championship game against Alabama? Because while, yes, the Crimson Tide are reloading, they bring in Bill O'Brien to be the offensive coordinator, Doug Marrone to be the offensive line coach. Must be nice to have 2 former NFL head coaches on your staff. I think by the time Georgia ultimately does play Alabama, the inexperience card, the newness card, the turnover card isn't one that's really all that applicable, because it'll have been, their 13th game that season for both programs. So there's a familiarity at that point. So, ultimately, I think Georgia, if they do play Alabama in 2021, I think it's just they're going to have to come out and just out execute them and beat them that way. The talent level is pretty close. So we'll ultimately see if Georgia's able to get it done and beat Alabama. I think they'll be certainly favored in every game, other than maybe that Clemson one. I think they'll be favored over Florida. I think Florida takes a small step back next season. So we'll see there. Randy Hall asks, starting center for the start of the year. So the offensive line is really interesting, and I might write about this sooner rather than later, but they have a lot of guys who have played in certain spots, but we don't necessarily know if it's the best spot for them. For example, Jamari Sawyer, I know there's talk of him potentially moving into left guard. Are we sure he's not a potential left tackle? And obviously you have guys like Xavier Truss, Broderick Jones as well to sort of monitor there at that left tackle, Marius Mims. But, what if Jamari Sawyer is your best guard? Conversely, at center, I know Warren Anderson got the starts there in games against Cincinnati and Missouri. What if it is Cedric Von Prawn? I expect to start spring. I think it's still going to be Erickson, but I think Von Prawn is really going to push there. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Van Prawn is the guy who is snapping to JT Daniels against Clemson to start the season. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Erickson's not going to see the field. I think you could certainly see him at guard. What happens at right guard is really interesting. Justin Schaefer is probably the more obvious name that really sticks out there, but Warren Erickson can play there. I think Clay Webb, Tate Ratledge as well are names to monitor there as well. If I had to guess right now, the only spot that really seems secure to me would be Warren McClendon at right tackle, just given sort of the way things transpired in the 2020 season. And ultimately, I think you can move Jamari Sawyer around. If you think left guard is the best spot for him and his potential, you can absolutely move them there. But you have to feel comfortable with what you have and trust Mims and Jones. And the reality is, I thought Jamari was a pretty serviceable left tackle for Georgia in 2020. So we'll sort of see there. We can take your questions, comments right now as well. Let's see. Yeah, Steve Highland mentions Mims. He is a physically impressive a high school prospect as I can remember. 6'7", maybe even 6'8", 330 pounds, just already really well, comparatively to a guy like Broderick Jones, who's already really well filled out and carries his weight well, already on campus going through spring practice. That's going to be a guy that's hard to keep off the field. You might be able to do it for 1 year, but in terms of physical strength and impressiveness, there aren't very many recruits that Georgia has landed that sort of rank up there with Mims. He's also the number one player in the state of Georgia for this past signing class. So Barry Thornton, good morning from China. Don't see that too often around here. It appears that my internet connection is lagging. That's disappointing. Well, if that's the case, Jason House, where does Muschamp fit in? I do think analyst is the role ultimately, where he will end up being, assuming he's on the Georgia staff. I know last week they put out a statement saying that he had not yet joined the program. I did see earlier some stuff on JT and Brock. JT is going to be the starting quarterback next year, unless there's just a horrific injury. I think he showed enough in his 4 games to end the season. And as far as Brock, look, I've been tuning the Brock bandwagon as much as anyone, but I think QB2 next year to start, it should be Stetson Bennett. I know Bennett and Carson Beck as well have the physical upside and the tools and the long-term starter ability. But you look at a guy like Stetson Bennett, he started games against Auburn and Tennessee. He's played on the road at Alabama, played on the road at Kentucky, played on the road against Arkansas and in these environments. And he's, obviously he didn't play well in those latter 2 games, but he won you games against Tennessee, Arkansas, and Auburn. So I think he's a real luxury to have as a backup quarterback and someone who going into the 2020 season is going to be imperative to have in case someone like JT who does have an injury. I think that will be interesting to see there. And ultimately, I think the competition, conversely, having said all that, I think you can have a real competition between Brock and Beck to sort of see, all right, 2022 rolls around, who's got the inside track to winning there and how they progress at that point. Let's see. There is not, Kirby Smart might not ever come out and say JT's our starter. I don't believe there's a cute quarterback competition. I think JT is pretty clearly the guy. I think he and Munkin have a really strong connection. And you saw some of the things JT was able to do at the end of the season. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they're able to do going forward as well. If I can get one more good question, we might we might end on that. So if you got one more good question out there, and again, I realize my internet apparently is not great. Apparently one of my roommates is on a Zoom right now for class, so not great timing here. Let's see. We can end, I guess we talked about the defensive back coach to start the night. I guess we can end the night talking about the secondary a little bit. I think Scene and Smith are going to be your starters there. I think obviously Scene has high upside potential and can really emerge there. And Smith was someone who played a lot better, especially in that Peach Bowl against Cincinnati. I thought he showed a little bit there. At corner, Keely Ringo's got to play at corner. He's got to be a guy. And obviously we offer our thoughts and prayers to his mom, Traley Hale, who had her cancer relapse. So I think you have to figure out a way to get a guy as talented, as gifted as Keely Ringo on the field. And by all indications, obviously he had the torn labrum this year, but I think he's someone who Georgia can certainly look to get more out of. At that other corner spot, is it a Jalen Kimber? What does Nyland Green come in and do? Is there a transfer portal candidate? I think that is absolutely something Georgia is going to consider and look at when those transfer portal guys start popping up in the spring and in the late spring and summer. I think you have to try and find someone that does have starting experience out there and can play opposite Ringo. And then I think a guy like Latavius Brini, someone who showed a little something in that Peach Bowl game against Cincinnati, I think he's probably going to be the star to start the season, and we'll sort of see how things go from there. I know Major Burns is a safety who is sort of impressed early on as well. So it's a lot of question marks there in the secondary. And, Georgia opens with Clemson next year, and it's exciting. We'll sort of see how things finish there and where they go from there. But that'll do it for us tonight. My name is Connor Riley. Tomorrow night, you have Jeff Sentell with Before the Hedges. I imagine we're going to do something around the schedule announcement at 2 o'clock tomorrow. You have Dog Nation Daily every Monday through Friday. We're going to do Cover 4 on Thursday night. I imagine we're going to talk a lot more about the schedule as well as the latest news and notes and what we have heard. Appreciate you guys for checking in. Mike Griffith on the beat on Monday nights. Those are always really informative and well done. So hope everyone has a great Tuesday night. Stay safe out there, and thanks for tuning in.